Monica, earlier you introduced us to 19th century collections of Asian ceramics at American institutions. Perhaps you could now introduce us to your two marvelous exhibitions at the Metropolitan Museum and discuss what these installations reveal about collecting and the international influence of Japanese ceramics in the 20th century and today. Monica?
Thank you for this great question. I would like to pick up the thread from where Glenn ended his comments on post-war Japanese ceramics and their impact on American clay art. This installation of modern and contemporary ceramics on the Great Hall balcony is a collaboration with Abraham Thomas, my colleague from the museum's Modern and Contemporary Art Department. We chose imperfection as the theme, an aesthetic shared in Japanese, American, and European ceramics since the mid-20th century. As all the speakers noted, imperfection is an important keyword in understanding the cultural interaction between Japanese clay art and its reception in the US and Europe. The roots of imperfection are wabi-sabi, rooted in 16th century Japanese tea culture. The first bay of the installation features oribeware from the 16th century from Mino in Gifu Prefecture, stoneware with freely applied glaze, irregular forms, and bold, eye-catching brush decoration, dramatically different from earlier monochrome tea vessels. This piece by Suzuki Goro from 1997 was inspired by Momoyama period oribeware. On this two-tiered food box, he used a traditional dark brown underglaze iron oxide decoration and the bright green, copper green oribe glazes to depict whimsical motifs of crows, lamps, nude women, geometric patterns, and circular forms, both on the exterior and interior of the work. Suzuki also applied the gold lacquer decoration, which was designed to mend cracks on the side of the box in the kintsugi tradition, highlighting repairs on tea bowls and also referencing tea aesthetics and wabi-sabi originated in the 16th century. The next bay highlights the continuation of the same tea aesthetics to the present and its reception and interpretation by Western ceramicists, such as Gertrude and Otto Natzlers. Traditional wood-fired kilns were of special interest to artists who wanted to explore both the random and controlled kiln effects and the textures produced by natural ash. I quote Paul Shaleff here, "I use imperfection as a device to push the viewer to consider the difference between perfection and beauty." Shaleff was one of the first modern American potters to employ traditional Japanese wood-firing techniques. Inspired by a visit to a New York exhibition in 1972 on Kitaoji Rosanjin, Shaleff traveled to Japan to study with master ceramic artists. He built his own Anagama-style wood-fired kiln, pioneering this technique in America. Like the adjacent 16th century jar, Shaleff's vessel is striking for its dramatically textured, uneven glaze and drip effects. These planned accidents, a result of ash and embers from burning logs settling onto the object during firing, are similar to other encouraged mistakes, including splits, warping, and deliberate glaze flaws. His conspicuous solder repair references the Japanese kintsugi repair techniques, which I also pointed out on Suzuki Goro's food box. In the 1950s, the American potters' encounter with Hamada Shoji and Kitaoji Rosanjin sparked a revived interest in Japanese pottery. Their embrace of historical styles, hand-shaping techniques, and the use of the wheel as demonstrated by Hamada, sitting cross-legged, facing the wheel and turning it with the bulb end of a wooden stick, were seen and interpreted as timeless. Japanese ceramics increasingly gained prominence in the American craft discourse, and discussions included teawares and zen. Hamada was a major figure in the Mingei movement and drew inspiration from various folk ceramic traditions which resonated with the American idea of primitivism. Spontaneous vitality, prioritized over perfection, is a frequent hallmark of Hamada's work. Such ideas influenced members of the Otis Art Institute in LA, including Peter Vulkos and Ken Price, who moved away from utilitarianism, explored new artistic potentials, and even incorporated Mingei aesthetics. The use of slab construction here liberates Peter Vulkos from the potter's wheel, allowing for a more freehand, asymmetrical, and essentially sculptural approach to form. In 1952, Vulkos attended Hamada Shoji's landmark American workshops. He admired Hamada's relaxed brushwork, which he considered rhythmical and dance-like in movement and gesture, an effect that defines the dramatic splash of white clay slip on Vulkos' own vessel. Warren Mackenzie and his wife Alex had apprenticed with Bernard Leach, who together with Hamada Shoji transformed 20th century studio pottery. Returning from England, Alex organized the now legendary 1950 tour by Leach and Hamada, which was attended by artists such as Peter Vulkos and Toshiko Takaezu, who was mentioned by Glenn Adamson previously, which profoundly influenced American ceramics. Here we can see Kitaojiro Sanjin at work in Kaneshige Toyo's studio in May 1952. In the spring of 1952, Kitaojiro Sanjin offered Isamu Noguchi and his wife, Yoshiko Yamaguchi, the use of a 200-year-old farmhouse on his property in Kamakura. Noguchi established the studio beside the farmhouse, and with access to Rosanjin's kilns, he created a series of ceramic sculptures and objects. While working in Kaneshige's studio, Noguchi created a small sculpture that represents a figure with a concentrated expression and a cigarette stub clenched in the teeth. It is most likely a self-portrait of Noguchi himself at work, as he was well known for chain smoking. So this piece by Yagi Kazuo, one of his masterworks in the Metropolitan Museum of Art's collection, called Direction of the Wind, Unglazed Clay Pipes, which was made in 1955, is emerging from a pottery industry steeped in tradition. Several young post-war Kyoto ceramicists founded Sodaisha, crawling through mud association to redefine clay as a valid medium for sculpture. They created abstract, hand-built forms called objets, borrowing the term from French surrealists used for found and repurposed art pieces. Here, Yagi cut and rejoined wheel-thrown cylinders and angled and embedded into a square with folded edges, creating multiple mouths that challenges the idea of conventional vessel. Such non-functional artworks were a means of deconstructing traditional methods of producing ceramics. The photo by Toshiko Takaezu, thanks to Glenn Adamson, who kindly shared this with me, shows Yagi's workshop in 1955, shortly after Toshiko Takaezu visited him, and shows the creation of Direction of the Wind. We ended the installation by showing two pieces by two British potters, Gareth Mason and Gordon Baldwin, capturing all the aesthetics that were influential in the West, transmitted from Japanese traditions of tea culture, wabi-sabi, Mingei, and Sodaisha traditions. Finally, I would like to call your attention to a new exhibition that was recently opened in the Japanese Gallery of the Metropolitan Museum of Art. The infinite artistry of Japanese ceramics will be on view through August 2027. And this is an exhibition highlighting the long history of Japanese clay art, going back to Jomon and Yayoi period artworks. And as you can see in this slide, I moved the Noguchi mask and paired it with a Haniwa, highlighting the inspiration Noguchi drew from Haniwa sculptures, identifying Haniwa as the beginning of the unique Japanese aesthetics in pottery. The exhibition highlights medieval artworks as well as contemporary pieces juxtaposed with each other and discussing the influence of, again, wood-fired kilns in the reception of Japanese Jomon period vessels or Kofun period vessels. In one case, I put together Jomon period cooking vessels, highlighting the sculptural qualities that were very influential in the understanding of the abstract qualities of Jomon and Kofun pieces in the 1950s. And it's still an effect that is very powerful in contemporary clay art. In a nearby case, I highlighted the story of Suever, influences from Korea, including the use of the wheel, high-fired vessels, and the paddling technique that defined the production of large-size storage vessels. I also discussed the six kiln traditions, featuring several masterpieces from the Harry Packard collection. In another section of the display, I highlighted the early traditions of blue and ware ceramic production in Japan, the so-called early imari, which was a main interest of Harry Packard. He started collecting early imari blue and whites as early as the 1950s, when these works were seen in Japan as Mingei folk craft artworks. On view, several tea-related ceramic pieces highlighting recent gifts from Peggy and Dick Danziger, including freshwater jar called Hotei and the tea bowl attributed to the founder of the Raku workshop in Kyoto. Also, a recent acquisition, a wonderful oribe vessel, a futamono, decorated with designs inspired by Tsujigahana textiles. Later in the exhibition, in the section where I'm highlighting the interaction between Japanese culinary traditions and ceramic production, I displayed a beautiful folding screen from the early period showing cherry blossom viewings in Kyoto in Higashiyama, and featuring a party scene with samurai enjoying the cherry blossoms and enjoying food and drinks. And the party scene includes several blue and white porcelains and celadonwares. And I displayed pieces from the Packard collection that were made at the same time when the screen was painted, highlighting the connections between the painted traditions of Kyoto lifestyle in the early period and the existing material culture, uh, making it a really important juxtaposition of ceramic culture as we know it from the Packard collection and as it was represented in paintings.
My final question goes to Glenn, which is in two parts. First, Glenn, could you please give us your thoughts on what the exchange between Asian and American ceramic artists looks like today? And secondly, what kind of art do you find is being produced as a result of this international dialogue?
It's great to be back now from London, so beaming into the conversation now, but with happy memories of the winter show. So I'll try to answer that question. Of course, it's another big one, and much could be said, but I'll just focus in on a few leading protagonists, starting here with Suzuki Goro, who we're hearing about in a couple of different ways in this conversation. This piece on the left is the one that's on view right now in the beautiful exhibition that Monica and Abraham Thomas created for the Metropolitan's mezzanine, so overlooking the grand entrance of the Met. And I'm starting with him not so much because of biographical details, which I think others would be better placed to offer, but really to suggest that there's a confluence between what I would perceive as a kind of traditional understanding of irregularity, expression, the embrace of accident, chance operations, and above all, a kind of sculptural implication in a functional object. So, a sense that one is understanding the object as a unique, unreproducible, one off, instantaneous, and above all, aesthetically powerful, irreducible experience. And that you find both in, as I say, the traditional tea ceremony practice, or at least certain aspects of it. And on the other hand, you find it, of course, in the post-war period. And already, as we've seen in the 1950s, there was a kind of shared dialogue in that respect. So East Asian ink painting, especially, but also ceramics, being very influential on figures like Volkas and Takezu. So that parallel starts to become more explicit in the last 20 or 30 years. So that in the case of someone like Goro, we have an artist who is simultaneously drawing down the energies of the Oribe tradition in his case, so this very distinctive palette of black on white with these wonderful green splashes, very distinctive coloration. So simultaneously drawing down those energies and also drawing up the new energies of abstraction, of expressionism. And it's really the meeting place between those two trajectories, as it were, from the well of tradition and up towards the aspirational, in a way you could say, transcendent possibilities of abstraction. It's at that intersection, that place of crossing, that we find so much in contemporary ceramics, not just from Japan and America, of course, and not just East Asia and America, but really in a more general sense, because of course the whole world has now looked to those traditions as a way of getting it their bearings. And we can look at so many different artists as a way of getting into this topic. Again, I've just chosen a few, not at random. There are artists that I love, but many more could be brought to the table in an equally representative way. But at any rate, here you have, for example, Jan Yang Dane, who is Korean American. And actually, despite the very sophisticated nature of her work, both from a technical and an aesthetic point of view, somebody who's relatively new to clay. She's been working in it only for a decade or so, so she doesn't have the extraordinary lifelong background that someone like Goro-san or a couple of the other artists that I'll be talking about do. And yet she's achieved this very, very compelling individual, you could say, kind of signature style. And I use that term advisedly because she's drawing on the calligraphic handwriterly effects that you might see in the work of someone like Cy Twombly, for example, from that period of abstract expressionism. And what I'm interested in here is particularly the contrast between these two works. So on the one hand, you have this Twombly-esque, or you could also compare the work on the right to the work of Joan Snyder, the great American abstract painter. So really, that surface is entirely achieved through painting like, or in fact, drawing like mark making. Although with also obviously an attention to the materiality of the ceramic body and the glazes, and particularly that combing through kind of sgraffito surface that you get on that right hand work is a very ceramic kind of a surface, that kind of furrowed quality. And then on the left, she's using glaze almost entirely, not that handwriterly mark making strategy, but rather this very interesting glazing approach, which evokes some of the balance between um, achievement and disaster that we saw in Volkas's work, for example. This really kind of high wire idea where the work is poised at the edge of almost falling apart, or looks as if it might peel off the surface. So a kind of contingency that runs all the way through her aesthetic, but also a very strong orientation towards historical ceramics, particularly Korean ceramics, such as the moon jar, for example. And I would say the same thing for another Korean American ceramist. This is Stephen Young Lee, who's very well known for these extraordinary and beautiful, in fact, quite moving objects where he takes traditional Chinese and Korean forms. In this case, and this is often what he focuses on, the Mei Ping, or the flower blossom, and related vase forms with these very high shoulders, fluted sort of pillar like foot. And he intentionally cultivates a kind of partial collapse of the surface, which on the one hand gestures towards the ruination of the object. And you could almost think of these things as kind of proto-archaeological in a way, a gesture towards the disastrous that's also perhaps embodied in these glazed drips that you see in this example although again, those could be likened to the drips that we see in the bottom of Chinese Haresford tea bowls, for example. So again, lots of different references happening here at the same time. But of course, we also have the idea of disruption as a classical idea from abstract expressionism and post-war abstraction. Think of the work of Fontana, for example, Lucio Fontana, the great Italian artist. And all of those things are happening at the same time. And also, in addition to that, you have the happenstance, individualistic choreography of each of these objects. And I always think that his works look also a little bit like those beautiful Tang dancing figures, you know, the tomb figures that you might see from the Chinese tradition with the beautiful tricolor sansai glazes. So this has a similar sense that the the sheath of the ceramic body has been torn apart, and but in its reimagining, it has become something like a garment or a cloak. So, you know, again, very multivalent and suggestive, but really drawing on a shared lexicon of these expressionist and traditional aesthetic tropes. And I'm going to finish with Jeff Shapiro, who is a great guy. He lives near me in the Hudson Valley. He's become something of a friend. And I would nominate him as perhaps the most proficient wood firing ceramist in America, which is saying a lot because there are many of them. In fact, Takezu and Volkas themselves had a lot to do with anagama firing, wood firing. He's built this very traditional style anagama in his at his studio in Accord in upstate New York, again near where I live. And he's drawing on an initial inspiration that he drew from his time in Japan. So this is a good example of the kind of exchange that you were asking about, Joan. He studied initially with Isizaki Jun in Bizen, and that Bizen, you know, tradition, one of those old kiln traditions, was really intrinsic to his early development. But over time, as he's come back to New York and in a way Americanized his work, he's become more and more attentive to the surroundings that have informed his practice. And he's particularly interested in the way that ice flows and the movement of freezing water over stone will create these kind of refractory optical effects. And also, as you can see on the left, the more spring-like or summery colors of lagoons or forests. We don't have so many lagoons in the upstate valley, but we certainly have plenty of forests. And in general, the sense of a kind of vital geology really runs through his practice almost literally. And I hope you can see here the absolutely extraordinary control and artistry of his glazing, and also the way that he uses these very abrupt, jagged cuts and sculpting maneuvers in the clay body to evoke that natural organicism. And again, a really strong sense here, as I mentioned with these other artists, and I think here the comparison with Suzuki Goro is especially apt. There's a sense that the modern abstract impulse and the traditional eccentricity of tea ceremony are in a way the same, and there's a kind of discovery of a synthetic unity here. And I'll just finish with this slide, which is a picture of a kiln god, Bizen sculptural kiln god that he acquired in Japan, which is still in his studio today. So presiding over his artistic endeavors, and I think a very good symbol of the fact that this exchange between Asia and America is alive and well.
Thank you to my marvelous panel for their acumen, dedication, and commitment. It was so wonderful to have you here with us to share your passion and insights into this fascinating topic. With Monica's brilliant The Infinite Artistry of Japanese Ceramics on view at the Met and the exhibition Kawai Kanjiro House to House at Japan Society, which will be open through May 10th, there will be a remarkable array of important Japanese and Asian ceramics to see in New York City this spring. Thank you, everyone, for your kind attention.